In the gentle stillness of Quiet Pines Wildlife Center, nestled beneath the Arizona sun, an extraordinary friendship unfolded between two unlikely companions. This is Limba, a bobcat with the spirit of the wild in his eyes. And this is Kazuma, a tiny Fennec fox with endless energy and ears that could hear a whisper from a mile away. From the moment they crossed paths, their bond was unmistakable. They became inseparable friends, filling their days with endless games of hide-and-seek, playful wrestling matches, and chasing one another. At dusk, the two curled up side by side. But their perfect world was about to face the ultimate test. Limba was wild, and the wilderness was calling him home. What happened next? No one could have predicted. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The Arizona sun beat down with an unforgiving intensity, baking the cracked earth and shimmering in waves above the asphalt. For most, it was just another sweltering Tuesday. But for the officers of the Arizona Game and Fish Department, it was the culmination of a month-long investigation into an illegal wildlife trafficking ring operating out of a dilapidated property on the outskirts of Tucson. Inside a grimy, windowless shed, the air was thick with the stench of fear and filth. Cages were stacked haphazardly, their occupants, exotic birds, reptiles, and a handful of mammals, panting in the oppressive heat. It was in this scene of despair that two tiny lives were about to intersect. In one cage, a bobcat kitten, no more than 6 weeks old, hissed weakly, his blue eyes wide with terror. His fur, meant to be a vibrant tapestry of spots and stripes, was matted and dull. He had been torn from his mother just days before, a commodity in a cruel trade. In another cage, just across the narrow, cluttered aisle, a baby Fennec fox with ears that seemed far too large for his tiny head trembled uncontrollably. He was a bundle of nervous energy and frantic yips, his body a testament to the stress he'd endured. He, too, was an orphan, destined for a life as an illegal pet. The raid was swift and efficient. The cages were carefully loaded onto trucks, a silent, somber parade of rescued souls heading towards a beacon of hope. The Quiet Pines Wildlife Center. Nestled in a secluded valley north of Phoenix, Quiet Pines was a sanctuary, a place of healing run by a team of dedicated rehabilitators. At its helm was Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a woman whose calm demeanor and gentle hands belied a fierce, unwavering commitment to the animals under her care. Two more coming in, called a young volunteer named Ben as the truck carrying the mammals backed up to the intake clinic. A bobcat kitten and a Fennec fox pup. Sarah nodded, her expression grim. Let's get them inside. George, can you prep the quarantine enclosures? George Peterson, a semi-retired veterinarian who volunteered most of his days at the center, was already on it. With the gentle patience that comes from a lifetime of caring for creatures great and small, he prepared 2 separate sterile enclosures. The protocol was clear. New arrivals, especially from unknown backgrounds, had to be isolated to prevent the spread of disease. The bobcat kitten was first. He was so small he fit in the palm of George's weathered hands. As Sarah conducted the initial examination, her touch was feather-light. He was dehydrated and malnourished, but miraculously, he had no major injuries. "He's a fighter," she murmured, administering subcutaneous fluids. "We'll call him Limba. It means spirit in a language I once studied. It seems to fit." Next was the Fennec fox. He was a whirlwind of frantic energy, his huge ears twitching, his black button eyes darting around the room. He was older than the bobcat, perhaps close to 2 years old, But he was emotionally fragile, a nervous wreck. "Easy there, little man," George cooed, his voice a low rumble. "You're safe now." They named him Kazuma, a Japanese name meaning harmony and peace, a hopeful prayer for the anxious creature. For the first week, Limba and Kazuma lived in adjacent quarantine enclosures. They could hear and smell each other, two lonely orphans in a strange new world. Limba, once he regained some strength, would spend hours watching the hyperactive fox through the wire mesh. Kazuma, in turn, seemed to be the only thing that could momentarily distract Limba from the phantom ache of his missing mother. It was George who first noticed the connection. "Sarah, come look at this," he said one afternoon, pointing towards the enclosures. Limba was pressed against the side of his cage, his tiny paws reaching through the mesh. On the other side, Kazuma was doing the same, his long snout twitching as he sniffed at the bobcat's paws. There was no aggression, no fear, only a profound, unspoken curiosity. "They're lonely," Sarah said softly. "They've both lost their families. In a way, all they have is each other." After they were medically cleared, the question of their next placement arose. Typically, they would be housed with their own kind. But Quiet Pines had no other bobcat kittens or Fennec foxes at the time. The staff debated the risks. A predator and a potential prey animal together? It was unconventional, to say the least. "I've seen this before," George argued during a staff meeting. "Trauma bonding. They were rescued together. They've been through the same ordeal. Their bond might be stronger than their instincts right now." Sarah, ever the pragmatist, was hesitant but saw the logic in George's words. They decided on a trial. They would introduce them in a larger, neutral enclosure, filled with toys, hiding spots, and enrichment activities, and observe them constantly. The day of the introduction, the entire staff seemed to hold their breath. Ben gently opened the door to Limba's carrier. The kitten stepped out cautiously, his spotted body low to the ground, his ears swiveling to take in every sound. A moment later, Kazuma was released. He shot out of his carrier like a champagne cork, a blur of pale fur and enormous ears. He skidded to a halt in the center of the enclosure, saw Limba, and froze. Limba stared back, his head cocked. For a long, silent moment, the fate of their relationship hung in the balance. Then, Kazuma let out a series of excited yips and bounded forward. He stopped just short of Limba and bowed playfully, his bushy tail wagging furiously. Limba, instead of pouncing, responded with a gesture of pure kittenish delight. He chirped, a soft bird-like sound, and batted gently at Kazuma's nose with a paw, his claws carefully sheathed. From that moment on, they were inseparable. Their days became a joyous symphony of play. The enclosure, which had once seemed so large and empty to them individually, was now their shared kingdom. They invented their own games, a unique blend of feline stealth and canine exuberance. Hide and seek was a favorite. Limba, a master of camouflage, would melt into the foliage, only the twitch of his short bobbed tail giving him away. Kazuma, with his satellite dish ears, would stand perfectly still, rotating his head until he pinpointed the faint rustle of a leaf, and then pounce with gleeful abandon. Their wrestling matches were a sight to behold. Limba, even as a growing kitten, was already stronger, but he always seemed to know to be gentle. He would roll onto his back, allowing the much smaller fox to climb all over him, nipping and yipping. Kazuma, for his part, developed a particular fascination with Limba's tail. The short, stubby appendage was an irresistible target. He would stalk it with comical seriousness, his entire body wiggling before making a dramatic leap and grabbing it in his mouth. Limba would feign annoyance, letting out a low growl and turning to swat at him, but his heart was never in it. Limba had his own mischievous habit. When he was feeling particularly lazy, he would simply walk over to wherever Kazuma was resting and, with a casual air of feline entitlement, sit down on him. Kazuma would let out a muffled squeak from beneath the growing bobcat, but he never moved. He would simply wait until Limba decided to get up, a living, breathing, and slightly squashed cushion for his best friend. George Peterson kept a detailed journal of their interactions. He'd sit on a bench outside their enclosure for hours, a gentle smile on his face. October 12th, he wrote. Kazuma brought Limba a grasshopper today. He dropped it right at his paws, as if it were a great prize. Limba didn't eat it. He just sniffed it, looked at Kazuma, and started grooming the fox's head. A clear sign of affection and acceptance. This is more than just friendship. It's family. The seasons turned. Autumn painted the pines in shades of gold, and winter brought a rare, light dusting of snow that sent Kazuma into a frenzy of delight and left Limba looking confused. Through it all, their bond only deepened. Limba grew from a lanky kitten into a magnificent young bobcat. His muscles rippled under his spotted coat, and his movements became more fluid, more powerful. He was the picture of a wild creature coming into his own. And that was the problem. The goal of Quiet Pines was always rehabilitation and release. Limba was a native Arizona species. He was healthy, strong, and possessed all the instincts necessary to survive. The wilderness was his birthright. Kazuma, however, was a different story. As a Fennec fox, a species native to the deserts of North Africa, he could never be released in Arizona. He required a specialized habitat and a level of care that the wild simply couldn't provide. He was a permanent resident. The staff began to talk about Limba's release. The date was set for the spring when prey would be plentiful. It was the right thing to do. It was their mission. But their hearts ached at the thought. "How are we going to separate them?" Ben asked one evening, watching the two of them curled up together for the night. Limba's larger body was wrapped around the small fox, a protective embrace. Kazuma was fast asleep, his nose tucked under Limba's chin, his giant ears finally still. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, her voice heavy. "But we have to. To keep Limba here would be selfish. It would be a cage, no matter how comfortable we make it." As the day of the release drew closer, the staff began the difficult process of preparing Limba. They minimized his human contact and started introducing live prey into his feeding routine to sharpen his hunting skills. The most painful part was the gradual separation from Kazuma. They began feeding them in different areas of the enclosure and eventually housing them in adjacent pens for short periods. The change in both animals was immediate and heartbreaking. Kazuma became a nervous wreck once more. He would pace the length of the fence separating him from Limba, letting out a constant stream of high-pitched, mournful cries. He barely ate. Limba, on the other side, would sit silently, his gaze fixed on the frantic fox, a low, guttural growl of frustration rumbling in his chest. When they were reunited at the end of the day, their relief was palpable, a frantic mess of nuzzling and grooming. The night before the release was the worst. George, making his final rounds, stood in the quiet darkness, watching them. They were curled up in their usual spot, tighter than ever, as if they knew what was coming. A tear traced a path through the wrinkles on George's cheek. "I'm sorry, boys," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." The morning was cool and gray. Sarah handled the tranquilizer dart herself. Limba didn't fight. He just looked at her with his intelligent golden eyes, and then glanced at Kazuma, who was hiding in their den, trembling. As Limba succumbed to the sedative, Sarah felt a pang of guilt so sharp it took her breath away. They drove him deep into the Tonto National Forest, miles from any human settlement. It was a perfect bobcat habitat, rugged and wild. Sarah and Ben placed the sleeping cat in a temporary transport crate, its door facing a dense thicket. They set up a perimeter of trail cameras and retreated to their vehicle to wait for him to wake up. An hour later, Limba stirred. He stood up, shook his head to clear the lingering grogginess, and looked around. He was in a world of new smells and sounds. He cautiously stepped out of the crate, his body a coiled spring of muscle and instinct. He looked back once, a long searching gaze in the direction the truck had come from, and then, with a flick of his bobbed tail, he melted into the forest. Back at Quiet Pines, a profound silence had fallen over the enclosure. Kazuma had finally emerged from the den. He walked to every one of their favorite spots: the hollow log, the sunning rock, the patch of soft grass where they wrestled. He sniffed the empty air, his ears drooping, his body language a portrait of utter desolation. He let out a single heart-wrenching cry, a sound of pure, undiluted grief that echoed through the Quiet Pines. The days that followed were agonizing for everyone. Kazuma refused to eat. He lost his vibrant energy, becoming a listless, furry ghost. He would spend his days lying by the gate, staring out at the path Limba had been carried down. The staff tried everything. They brought in new toys, special treats, even tried introducing him to a gentle older dog, hoping for a spark of his old self. But Kazuma wanted nothing to do with any of it. He was waiting. George would sit with him for hours, talking to him in his low, soothing voice. "He's not coming back, little fella," he'd say, his own heart breaking. "He's wild now. He's where he's supposed to be." Meanwhile, the trail cameras told a story of success. Limba was a natural. They had footage of him successfully hunting rabbits, navigating the rocky terrain, and scent marking his new territory. He was thriving. Sarah showed the footage to the staff, her voice filled with a forced brightness. "See, we did the right thing. He's happy." But was he? Months passed. Summer's heat gave way to the crisp air of autumn. Kazuma had settled into a state of quiet melancholy. He survived, but the spark was gone. The staff had almost given up hope of seeing the playful fox they once knew. It was a late afternoon in November when it happened. Ben was hosing down the pathways when he heard a sound from the woods just beyond the center's main fence. It was a familiar call, a sort of cross between a cough and a bark. A bobcat's call. He dismissed it at first. There were wild bobcats in the area. But the call came again, closer this time, more insistent. And then, from inside the enclosure, came an answering cry. A frantic, joyful series of yips. Ben dropped the hose and ran to the fence. His jaw dropped. Pacing just on the other side of the wire, his body leaner and more scarred than when he'd left, but his eyes unmistakable, was Limba. He wasn't just passing by. He was focused intently on Kazuma's enclosure, calling out, his body tense with purpose. He had come back. He had traveled miles, navigating unfamiliar territory, crossing who knows what dangers, all to return to this one specific spot. "Sarah, George, get out here. You are not going to believe this," Ben yelled, his voice cracking with emotion. Sarah and George came running. When they saw Limba, they stopped dead in their tracks, speechless. Inside his enclosure, Kazuma was a different animal. He was alive again, bouncing off the walls, yipping and crying, his entire body trembling with ecstatic energy. Limba paced anxiously, his gaze locked on his friend. He wasn't looking for food or shelter. He was looking for Kazuma. Tears streamed freely down Sarah's face. All her scientific certainty, all her professional protocols, melted away in the face of what she was witnessing. This wasn't just an animal returning to a familiar food source. This was a pilgrimage. This was a rescue in reverse. "Open the gate," George said, his voice thick with awe. "What?" Sarah looked at him, stunned. "Open the main gate, Sarah. Let him in." It was against every rule. A wild, untamed predator, free inside the center. But looking at the two animals, separated by a thin wire fence but connected by an unbreakable bond, it felt like the only rule that mattered. Slowly, Sarah walked to the main gate and unlatched it. She pulled it open just enough for a bobcat to slip through. Limba didn't hesitate. He shot through the opening and made a beeline for Kazuma's enclosure. The reunion was an explosion of pure joy. The moment the enclosure door was opened, Limba rushed in. They met in the middle, a tangle of fur and happy sounds. Limba purred, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated through the air while he rubbed his face all over Kazuma's. Kazuma, for his part, squirmed with delight, licking Limba's face and, of course, immediately grabbing his stubby tail. They wrestled and rolled and chased each other like no time had passed at all. The spark wasn't just back in Kazuma, it was a roaring bonfire. That evening, the staff held an emergency meeting. The evidence was irrefutable. Limba had not just survived in the wild, he had chosen to leave it. He had chosen his friend. "We can't keep him caged," Ben said. "It wouldn't be right." "And we can't send him away again," George added, his voice firm. "It would be cruel." It was Sarah who came up with the solution, an idea as unprecedented as the friendship it was meant to serve. "We won't cage him," she announced. "He's a wild animal. He deserves his freedom, but his home is clearly here, with Kazuma. So we'll give him both." The next week, a local contractor, moved by the story, volunteered his time to build something unique. In the side of Kazuma's enclosure, they installed a specially designed one-way door, a Bobcat entrance. It was large enough for Limba to pass through easily, but it led out into the wider world. He could come and go as he pleased. And so, a new, extraordinary chapter began at Quiet Pines Wildlife Center. Limba resumed his life as a wild bobcat. He would leave for days at a time, his instincts calling him to the hunt and the solitude of the forest. The staff would track his movements on the cameras, watching him live the life he was born for. But he always came back. He'd return, sometimes sleek and well-fed from a successful hunt, other times tired and muddy, and slip through his special door. And the first thing he would do, every single time, was find Kazuma. Their reunions were always joyous, and every night he was there, the Wildlife Center would fall quiet, and the staff would smile, knowing that in the enclosure at the heart of their sanctuary, a wild bobcat and a little Fennec fox were curled up warmly together, inseparable and safe, a testament to the fact that friendship knows no species. And home is not a place, but a feeling.